Hello. So I decided to do a training on the STEAM app. This is something that I've spoken about in previous workshops, some of the trainings, but I've never done a training specifically on that. And I also got this flip chart. So you can thank the nerd in me for this training. I was like, yay, I have a flip chart. I can do something on the STEM app. So I bought it for workshops and stuff, but also I think it's so great to have it for my clients. So I hope they'll be very excited about this. But maybe it's just me. So having this, because it's a really great way to see specifically these maps, but it can be used for other things as well. So I'm going to be doing a first an explanation of what the STEAM map is and what we use it for. And then I'm going to be talking about an example of this, and then we'll go through how you can use this yourself. So it can be used for anything in practice, any kind of thing that is in some way triggering or just causing you discomfort or anxiety. And most of all, it is a self-awareness tool. It can be used to change things, to examine thoughts, to feel different things, and create different behaviors and different results. But the main purpose of it is to bring awareness to what is happening and why it's happening. And so that is the main thing that we'll be talking about today. And then in trainings following on from this, I will talk a little bit more about how you can use this a bit more, like in a more advanced way in some sense, or just carry on with the work on this. Okay, so I hope you can see this properly. Let's see, make sure you can see me as well. Okay, so the STEER map is, like I said, a kind of awareness model for your brain. You're trying to see like what is happening in my brain. And especially, like I said, when we have sort of discomfort or strong emotions in practice, we can use this model. So this was developed by Dr. Sasha Hines. She is a developmental psychologist and a coach. And there are different versions of this. It's based on CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, but we're not doing therapy here, we're doing coaching, but we're just using the concept behind cognitive behavioral therapy, which is just that your thoughts and your behaviors and your emotions are all linked together. They affect one another and are affected by one another. So that's kind of the theory behind this. And it is a model. So it's not going to encompass the entirety of human psychology, but it is distilled to something that is very useful to us. So I want you to think about using this with two lenses in mind. The first is this one of radical responsibility. So I've talked about this in the group quite a bit, especially recently. But thinking about, as my coach sometimes puts it, as taking responsibility even when you don't have to. So we're taking responsibility not because it's our fault or because there are no external influences beyond our control. We are using it in a way that we are just getting back into the driver's seat. We're focusing on what we can control, what we can influence. We are focusing on our ability to influence this situation, and we are taking responsibility for doing that, even if we weren't at fault, even if there are other factors, right? So that's the first one, radical responsibility. And this will get clearer as we use this. The second is useful over true. So for example, this will also get clearer as we do this, but let's say, for example, a thought is, I'm so exhausted. You might genuinely feel that that's true. We're not trying to say like, oh, it's not true, but it's not helpful to keep thinking, I'm so exhausted, I'm so exhausted, I'm so exhausted, because you can see what that would create, right? So in some of the types of models, you might think like, but that is how I feel, or that is the truth, or whatever it is, right? And sometimes that just shows you where an underlying like really strong belief is. And we get to question that and we get to loosen the grip of that. But sometimes it's just reorientating yourself like, yes, that might be true. Okay. But what is actually useful to you to help you move forward? Okay. So the STEER is a acronym. The S stands for situation. You can also think of like the stimulus, like what is the trigger or the stimulus or the situation in which this thing played out, this situation played out. T is for your thoughts. I'd recommend that for each map that you do, you just pick one thought because they will produce different emotions, etc. So you can write down all of your thoughts, but I would advise that you do a separate map for each thought. And then the E is for the emotions that come up. This can be more multiple emotions for the same thought. A is for the actions or what behaviors come out of this map. This can also be inaction and it can be reaction. So any behavior that is happening. And then R is the result. This is almost like the cumulative effect. What is going to be the end result, the bigger picture result of everything that's happening in this map. Okay, so that's the steer map, and we essentially map this out. We can map it this direction, we can map it that direction, we can start here and go there and there, we can start here and go there and there, it doesn't really matter. But in the beginning, we're just going to start by a kind of linear progression of this, just so that you can get comfortable with this map. Okay. So I chose this situation because it's relatively emotionally neutral. It's not like a really hectic thing that's happening, but it's a nice way to kind of see this in action. And this is a model of mine. So it's based on true events. Okay, so I'm going to show you how this works, and then I'm going to just tell you what was another clinician in my same practice that had a completely different steer map in the same situation. Okay, so the situation, which is the stimulus, is the patient was in the waiting room 15 minutes before her appointment. Okay, so you'll notice that this is like a very much a statement of fact. So we want to think about the most neutral way to describe the situation. We don't want to already be adding a narrative, already be adding emotions to it. It's like I often tell people, just think of like telling a story in a really boring way. Like the man walked 5 steps, and then the man opened the cupboard, and then the man took out a bag of rice, whatever. So you are just doing, a coach of mine also used to say, just the facts, man. So this is just the facts, it's neutral. Another way you can think about this is if I got 50 people, 50 random people in a room together to discuss this, they would all agree on this information, right? So we are making sure that it's just the narrative, it's just the facts, or not our narrative, but it's just the like as if we're reporting the news. Okay. And here is what I think when this happens, right? So my thought is, oh, no, she's sitting in early, and so our coffee machine was in the waiting room. So I go to get my coffee because I have a break. I'm like, oh, I can quickly take a break. But now I see my next patient is already waiting in the waiting room early for her appointment. So my thought is, oh, now I can't take a break. Now I can't even have my coffee. And the emotion that produces is something along the lines of like, I'm annoyed, I'm resentful to that patient. My behavior, and I often say, like, if you think about just having a camera on you, like a hidden camera, watching your behavior, what would you see? And you would see me like going back to my room, sitting there and just like being annoyed and fuming. And then I take the patient in early as well. So the result of all of that, me thinking now I can't have a break, I'm annoyed, I'm fuming, and then I take the patient in early and I'm all annoyed and resentful. The result of that is I obviously don't take my break, don't have my coffee, I don't chill, I don't rest, so I'm tired, I'm feeling resentful, so I'm also like disconnected from this patient, I'm annoyed with her. So that is just the model of like what was happening in that situation. And you can notice a couple of things. This is why I say this is a very good awareness tool, because just this information, and I think often we struggle to find this neutral situation because we already want to go into what our narrative was. We already want to put here, patient was in the waiting room, so I couldn't have coffee. I couldn't have coffee because the patient was in the waiting room. The patient was being disrespectful, or the patient was being what do you call it, entitled, or whatever it is. Like we already want to add our own narrative to this, right? just the facts here, and then you can see what I made this mean. So that's what is so powerful at just doing these two. Even if you don't do these, you can see what your brain, meaning your brain is making from a very neutral situation, right? My brain made it mean that I am now not allowed to have my break. And then what followed from that was because of the meaning that I was making from this. I was annoyed, sitting and fuming, taking it early, don't have my break, I'm annoyed, I'm resentful. The patient is like, I don't know, what I did wrong? Or like, she's clearly in a bad mood today. Not to say I took it out of my patients. Obviously, we all try and like, ooh, but I promise you, your patients can feel a lot of this stuff. We don't hide it as well as we think we do. But either way, so there you can see what meaning you're making of that. And then you can see what is happening. So we like to say that this result, like I couldn't take my break today, I'm feeling annoyed, I'm resentful, I'm feeling disconnected from my patient, all these results that we have here, we want to say that it's because of this. We want to explain it by, it's because my patient was in the waiting room 15 minutes early. But really, it's because of what we made that mean. This whole map is because of what we were thinking here. This is how it kind of follows along, right? So that's the other really important thing to notice. The last thing that I want you to notice here is that I'm creating the very thing that I'm thinking. So now I can't take a break. What ends up happening? I don't take a break. And you'll often see that when you do this map, you want to find reflections of your thought line in your R line, T line in your R line. So often you'll either find that it's reinforcing this exact same thing, or it's kind of reflected. So for example, one of my thoughts often with patients was they're not listening to me. They're not paying attention to me. So I'm talking and they're kind of distracted, or they're just like, you know, when you see some of the eyes are like glazed over. So my thought is they're not listening to me. And I go on this whole like other steer model, right? I go on like, again, feeling annoyed, resentful. I feel like they're disrespecting me. And so I also disconnect from the patient. I'm going into this whole like mental spin of like patients also this and they don't listen and they don't respect me. And guess what happens? I don't listen to the patient because I'm in my head. I'm doing my own little mental thing, right? So I'm not able to be fully present with my patient and actually listen to them. So that's what you'll often find. Either you're doing the exact same thing that you're thinking someone else is doing, or you are just reinforcing the exact same thing that you were thinking. And often you'll find like interesting little turnarounds as well, but we'll get into that with more like developing this model further. So I just want to tell you that, or tell you about the other clinician in my practice who had the exact same thing, right? So the way that I knew this is I went to my lunch break and I was complaining to my friend, this other clinician, and I was saying, so annoyed because like I couldn't even have a break because my patient arrived early and all this kind of stuff. And she like could not understand. Sorry, you're doing weird things. She could not understand what I was saying. She was like, what do you mean? Like your patient was early and then? And I'm like, yeah. So then I like, you know, had to go back to my room and just wait a little bit and then take her in early. And she's like, I wouldn't have done that. And I'm like, what? So her model was completely different. When she sees a patient waiting 15 minutes before her appointment, do you know what she does? She goes to the coffee machine, says hi to her patient, gets a cup of coffee, and goes and has her break. And she takes the patient in at the time that she was going to take them. And I'm not talking about like one is right and one is wrong. I'm just trying to illustrate the fact that the situation, the neutral situation, can be exactly the same, and two different clinicians can make opposite meanings of this, right? Like another clinician might think, oh, this is awesome. I get to take her in early and then I get to go home early. Or I'm going to be early for my next patient, or I'm going to take a longer break after this, or whatever it is, depending on what they are thinking about it and what their particular situation is, they are going to have a whole different map of this. So this is the awareness that we want to bring to this, is what is our brain making this situation mean? And here's where we often then try and see where we can question this a little bit and think about this and think about why we feel this way, etc. But again, for now, just awareness of this is what your brain is making that mean. And then all this happening as a result of what you made it mean and not because of this. Okay. I'm going to use a very common thing that my clinicians will report to me in their CMA. So there are variations of this, but this is often one of the situations that tend to bring up a lot of like negative thoughts and negative emotions. So the situation is the patient returns for follow-up. You know, whether that's the third one or the sixth one or the whatever one, and the patient returns for follow-up appointment and says, I'm still in pain. Or some version of that, right? Like, how much longer is this going to take? Or I'm having a bad day, or I don't see any difference, whatever the case is, right? Some version of that, some version of them coming back to you and saying that something isn't going well. And you'll notice that here in the S line, I quoted the patient exactly. This makes sure that you're not already adding your narrative to it, right? So we want to say patient returns for follow-up appointment and is just complaining and you know, doesn't understand what we talked about with the appointment or the trajectory or whatever it is, right? So we want to add our narrative already, and the using quotes of saying like, this is exactly word for word what the patient actually said helps us to keep it very neutral. And again, just finding that is really helpful because you take out your own narrative and emotion out of it. So you can start to think already, like, what would your thoughts or what are your general thoughts when this happens? And I usually find that clinicians will do either one of these or a combination of these. They'll make it mean something about them as a clinician. They'll make it mean something about their patient, or they'll make it mean something about their career or their profession, right? So some version of like, I'm a terrible clinician, I don't know what I'm doing, what did I do wrong? Or making it mean something about the patient. They don't take responsibility for their health. They didn't listen when I was explaining how this was going to work. They are impatient. They just want, you know, the quick fix. Or we make it mean something about our profession. Like, this is why I should be doing this other profession. Like, this profession is just, there's no what do you call it? It's a thankless profession, right? There's no gratitude, there's no fulfillment. You just get patients that complain all the time. So those are generally the things that I find that clinicians will do. So I'm going to just use an example from a clinician that I coached, where she said, they're not taking responsibility for their health. So in some way, she was sort of blaming the patient for this, right? And just keep in mind, like, that's all the patient has said. We have no idea yet why that actually is, what they think it is. We just assume, or this particular clinician assumes, that the patient is blaming her for still being in pain. And so this is her narrative. Essentially, she's thinking like, well, you should have done X, Y, Z. You probably didn't do the exercises I gave you, did you? You probably didn't follow the advice I gave you. And so she's judging them. They're not taking responsibility for their health. The emotion is something like judgment or judgy. I don't know if that's an actual emotion, but feeling judgy. And then something like annoyed, maybe also resentful, like I'm working so hard, I'm doing so much, and the patient isn't like meeting me halfway kind of thing, right? The actions that she takes. So I said this could also be like inaction. So she doesn't ask any more questions. Right? She doesn't find out like, okay, tell me more about that. Like since when were you still in pain? Is it like the whole time? What led up to that? What do you think is going on? Or, any like follow-up questions or more detail that would help her figure out what is actually happening here. She didn't do that because she was so like in this space. So it doesn't ask more questions and starts re-explaining exercises, advice, the like expected trajectory, but like, so she's going like, oh, okay, they didn't take responsibility for their health. So she's re-explaining everything because they clearly didn't like get it the first time, right? And she might be re-explaining like why it's important that they do all of those things, right? So she's going into her own like course of action without getting more information about what is actually happening. And then she's treating, and she's kind of in her mind, like mentally fuming and ruminating. So again, like I'm just using an example. It's not like whatever happens here, there's like a specific thing that happens. It's going to be different for each clinician. We all think about things differently, but we also experience different emotions and we do different things in order to cope with those emotions and those thoughts. And then the result is because she's mentally in her own thing about, oh, patients are so frustrating, they don't take responsibility for their health, I'm doing so much, etc. There's disconnect again from the patients. She's maybe like the care is less good quality because she didn't actually get more information. Like she doesn't actually know what's going on. She doesn't actually know that they didn't understand the exercises and the advice, and she doesn't know that they didn't understand why that's important, why they have to do it. She just assumed that that's the reason that they're still in pain, and she just got defensive. Maybe that's a good one to add here, defensive. She got defensive because she thought that they are like blaming her for this and they're not taking responsibility for it. So less care, less quality. Not careless policy, careless. The care has less quality. What else? And it also just reinforces the same message, right? Because when she goes through this whole process, and she's not asking any more questions, she's not actually figuring out why this is. It might be something that is unrelated to them not taking responsibility for their health. But because she didn't find out, she doesn't know. So to her, this whole situation just reinforced her belief that patients don't take responsibility for their health. She didn't get any evidence to the contrary, right? She just sees it as more evidence that patients don't take responsibility for their health. And so she reinforces that. She still believes patients don't take responsibility. And what was really interesting to notice with this particular clinician, is that she saw it as if the patient doesn't take responsibility for their health, then I have to do more. And so and part of it is like in her treatment, she'll then do more because she almost now is like compensating for the patient not taking responsibility. That's what she perceives. She's re-explaining all the stuff when it could have been completely unnecessary. So she ends up taking responsibility. She ends up taking more responsibility for their health. Or let's say outcomes, helpful outcomes. So again, she's reinforcing that same thing. Right now, she's doing more work, she's taking more responsibility, and it reinforces to her that patients don't take responsibility. And when they don't, that she has to work harder, and that whole cycle continues. And she just kind of keeps embedding those same beliefs. And this is why it is so important to do this kind of work and to see what's actually happening. Because then we actually have the power to change it and the power to do something differently. Whereas now, when we just keep on repeating the same things, we're embedding those beliefs stronger and stronger and stronger. They become our entire reality, and we can't even imagine something different, right? And so it is really important, like I said, just to see this at first, because then you can kind of drop this narrative a little bit and just be like, I'm just going to find out what's happening and not make any assumptions. But we will do further training on like how you can actually use this awareness to then make changes and to do things differently in the future. I hope that was helpful, and I will see you guys soon.